Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare. You know, hearing the words Spider-Man and 4 together still make me a little sad to this day. And we all know why. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy just didn't go out on a high note. While I kind of like Spider-Man 3 and find a lot to admire about the film, for me, there's just no denying that it's the weakest of the three movies, and kind of by a large margin too. The fact that Spider-Man 3 is a letdown, and that a lot of that has to do with Sony's interference on the production of the film, just leaves such a bitter taste in my mouth, because it's so clear that Raimi and his take on Peter Parker deserve a swan song that's as good as the rest of the series. The fact that he'll almost certainly never get one, maybe a cameo in Spider-Verse 2 or something at best, is definitely one of the sadder stories in blockbuster filmmaking. A few years ago, a channel called Cut Short did a great video about the production history behind Spider-Man 4, which I'll try to remember to put a link to in the description. But this video isn't really about the facts of why the film fell apart. Instead, I just wanted to spend this week talking about what I would have loved to have seen based on the few elements of the script and the storyboards that we do know about. So with that being said, let's jump back to 2011. Not the boring, lame one that we actually got, the version where Spider-Man 4 really hit theaters on its planned release date of May 6th. So I'll quickly try to lay out what we do know about Spider-Man 4. It would have opened with a montage of Spidey hauling in some supervillains that he beat with relative ease, including Bruce Campbell as Mysterio. It would have featured the Vulture, possibly played by John Malkovich or Ben Kingsley. And it would have had Felicia Hardy in it, probably played by Anne Hathaway. Not as Black Cat though, as a character who would eventually become Vultress, and who would try to take down Spider-Man as well. I'm gonna try to use this as a vague outline when talking about what I would have liked to have seen. But remember, none of these deals were ever finalized, so I'm not going to consider it set in stone. Lots of these things probably would have changed from this early stage. So if I had to change something based on this pitch that we already have, I would have really liked to have seen Felicia Hardy actually as the Black Cat here. If her function in the story is to fight Spider-Man at the end on Vulture's behalf, she could still do that as her original character. Black Cat isn't usually a full-blown villain, but there's plenty of reasons why she would fight Spidey. That's kind of one of her favorite things to do. Anne Hathaway, who would go on to play Catwoman a year after Spider-Man 4 was supposed to be released, is a very solid casting choice here, I think. I could see her and Maguire having some fun chemistry on screen. And Tobey's Peter Parker, being as earnest and occasionally dorky as he is, would just be a really fun version of the character to put up against Black Cat, who is incredibly good at flustering Peter and throwing him off his game.
Skate on, my son.
It's a little weird to talk about a different take on Vulture post-Homecoming, where Michael Keaton did such a great job, but I do really like what Raimi seemed to have been going for here. Apparently, he knew that viewers might have a hard time taking the elderly villain seriously, so he wanted to go with someone who the audience could really fear in the role. And for that, John Malkovich is a pretty perfect choice. But okay, we have the elements in place, but what should be the real heart of the story? One sort of minor thing that I would really like to see dealt with is Peter's feelings about Harry Osborn's death. I've always thought Harry's Rush story was the worst element of 3. And even though Alex at High Tops Films made a really great defense of it in his video on the film, for me, this is just one of the greatest letdowns of the Raimi trilogy. We had 2 movies of really well-constructed build-up to Harry's turn against Peter, and it was really depressing to see the payoff to that kind of shoved into a C-plot. I think 4 could have really made up for that, at least partially. It could be that even after months, or maybe even a full year or 2 has gone by, Peter still has a lot of unresolved feelings about his death, and is kind of haunted by him. I mean, his best friend went from hating him and calling him a murderer to sacrificing his own life for him. That's bound to mess with anyone's head, especially with someone who's as self-critical as Peter Parker. Also, I know the plan was probably only for him to be in it for a scene or 2, but I would have loved to have seen Bruce Campbell's Mysterio be a supporting character in the film. It's clear that his take was going to be very different from what we ended up with in Far From Home. Probably he would have been more of a campy joke, not a feared supervillain. And that's fine with me because Campbell would be amazing at that. That's why it'd be so great if he was in more than just 1 or 2 scenes. Like maybe this Quentin Beck was working with the Vulture before he went to jail and now realizes he's in way over his head and has to ask Spider-Man for help. Campbell is just so good at playing overconfident cowards, and I think that would just be the perfect way to go here. Another area that I think Spider-Man 4 could have been really different from the rest of the franchise is to fully embrace how old Peter Parker and Tobey Maguire were. He should just be married to MJ in this one. Like no build-up, no big on-screen wedding. The movie just jumps in with the pair being a married couple. Like Peter Parker was a married man for literally decades in the comics. But for the past 20 years or so, Marvel has shied away from this over and over again, especially in adaptations. It's like they're really afraid to just let Peter age. Spider-Man 4 could have cut against that and just presented a Peter Parker who was unapologetically older. Don't get me wrong, I like high school Spider-Man a lot, but I feel like that's almost always the setting we get now. PS4 game obviously notwithstanding. Like maybe Peter actually graduates college in this one while MJ is busy trying to land acting gigs. Okay, so this next suggestion might be depressing, but I think it could also be really important. I love Rosemary Harris as Aunt May. Most versions these days really shy away from having the character be a retired, kindly old lady, but the Raimi films never did. Still, far from being the one-dimensional character that you see in a lot of old Spider-Man cartoons, she brought a level of care and dignity to that role that I think has yet to be repeated. Honestly, a lot of my favorite scenes in Spider-Man 2 have her in them. She's a really great part of these movies. But, and hear me out, I think she should have died in Spider-Man 4. Maybe you hate that idea, and I get that, but I really think it could serve as the heart of the film. And honestly, the character already felt incredibly marginal in her reduced role in that third movie. And I don't want her dying at the Vulture's hands or anything like that, but of natural causes, as Peter has to deal with the fact that even with all of his powers, there's still no stopping time. The death of Aunt May in the late 90s comics was really beautifully handled, and I think that they could have drawn a lot of inspiration from that here. It would give Rosemary Harris the send-off that she deserved in the role, and really stress this idea that Peter is getting older and having to deal with more mature problems. But hey, if you do hate that idea, feel free to let me know. I just think it could have been great.
Now what are we gonna fight for?
Truth.
And...
Justice!
Good boy.
Beat the villains. Control them.
So yeah, that's a few thoughts on what I would have liked to have seen in Spider-Man 4. Like I said, if you have any thoughts or a clear idea of what you would have liked to have seen, let me know and I'll be reading those in the comments. Maybe you have a lot of other ideas you want to get onto paper too. If that's the case, why not check out Storytelling 101, Character, Conflict, Context, and Craft on Skillshare. Taught by best-selling author Daniel Jose Older, this is a course that really gets into the nitty-gritty of fundamental writing techniques and breaks them down in a way that's interesting and immediately helpful. And, really importantly, in a way that I hadn't heard 1,000 times before. But that's not all you'll find on Skillshare. There's tons of great animation, marketing, entrepreneur courses, and more. It's hard to even scratch the surface because Skillshare has well over 25,000 courses to pick from, and an annual subscription is less than $10. The first 1,000 to click on the link in the description below will get 2 months of access to those classes totally free. Get started today by going to skl.sh/captainmidnight32.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.